Hi, everyone. Welcome to Transitioning to College for Students with Paralysis. The Reeve Foundation is pleased to announce a new partnership with Accessible College. Accessible College provides college preparation and transition support for students with physical disabilities and health conditions. The Reeve Foundation is sponsoring a limited number of free consultations with Accessible College so that there is no charge to the student or their family for the service. Today's webinar will be hosted by Annie Tolkien, the founder and director of Accessible College. Now I'm going to turn it over to Annie. Hi, Annie.
Hi, thanks for joining us, everyone. Welcome to the webinar. We're going to be talking today about transitioning to college for students with paralysis. Like Kaylee said, I'm Annie Tolkien. I'm the founder and director of Accessible College. And I'm really excited today to share some information about this partnership that Accessible College has with the Christopher and Dana Reeve Foundation. We started this project back in the end of September, and I wanted to give kind of some updates and have you all hear from some students and clients who I've been working with through the Reeve Foundation. So we'll have some folks with us here today um, to answer some of your questions and to give you some insight into what we do together. And I'll put some links in the chat box in a few minutes because we did a webinar back in September when we kicked this off. And it has a lot of great information about the details between the differences between high school and college in terms of the laws and the types of accommodations that students might request in the college setting. And so if you missed that one, you might want to check that one out too. So I'll make sure that everybody gets the links both in the chat box here, and then this webinar is being recorded, so we'll make sure to send those links in the follow-up as well. And I have a few other things that I'm going to put links to in the chat box too, so you guys can get those. So just a few technical points for everybody. Your videos are off and you are muted. And like I said, the webinar is being recorded and it will be available on the Reeve Foundation website, and you'll get an email with the recording as well. If you have a question, which you likely will during the session, please feel free to go ahead and put that into the Q&A down at the bottom. You have a little panel. There's a little slot that says Q&A. You can also put it into the chat box too if you want to direct it to a specific panelist or the Q&A. So either one, whatever works best for you, go ahead and put it in. There's also captioning available too. So if folks need captioning, you can go ahead and choose that down in the bottom panel. And if you have any questions or trouble accessing these things, you can always shoot a chat to the panelists and we can help you out. So let's go ahead and jump on in for today. Just a little look at the agenda. So I will do a little introduction. We'll talk a little bit about this project. We'll look at this new transition guide that I created for the Reeve Foundation. And we'll look at some of the current project participants, kind of the demographics and the makeup of the participants, of the people who are already participating in the project. And we'll talk about how to sign up for the project, and we will take your questions as well. So like I said, I'm Annie Tolkien. I'm the founder and director of Accessible College. And the mission of Accessible College is to provide students with physical disabilities and health conditions and their families with supports to ensure a successful transition to college. So we work with students with a variety of health conditions. It could be POTS, lupus, cancer, autoimmune disorders, Crohn's disease, mental health conditions, chronic fatigue. And we also work with students with physical disabilities, such as students who are paralyzed and use wheelchairs and have other mobility impairments, hearing impairments, and visual impairments as well. And the reason that we do that is because colleges and universities provide varying levels of support for students with disabilities and health conditions. And the services that Accessible College provides help to bridge the gaps and empower students and families to effectively work together to create positive educational experiences for students. So I have over 10 years of experience in the disability field. Nearly 6 of those were spent as the Associate Director of the Academic Resource Center at Georgetown University, which is Georgetown's Disability Support Office. And you'll hear a lot about disability support offices in the college context, because most colleges have a disability support office. Sometimes it's called disability services or student disability services or disability student services. So you might hear some different names for it, but at Georgetown, it was called the Academic Resource Center because it had a dual mission of providing academic support for students, as well as providing accommodations for students with disabilities. So my experience spans nationally, and my background is in education. So my master's is in special education, and my undergraduate degree is in secondary education. And I also have a certificate in health coaching from Georgetown as well. But the real catalyst for me to launch Accessible College was that time that I spent at Georgetown University. So at Georgetown, I worked with undergraduate, graduate, and medical school students with physical disabilities and health conditions who were seeking accommodations. So I was the person who was engaging with these students in what is known as the interactive process. So I was reviewing their documentation. I was asking them questions about their disability and about their needs and what they thought their needs might be on campus. And so now I use that information in this role to help support students. Um, the accommodations that students were receiving that I worked with at Georgetown typically ranged from everything from academic and testing accommodations to housing accommodations, transportation, recreation accommodations. Um, and so that's one of the things that I think a lot of people aren't aware of, that the accommodations in the college setting really range through the whole college experience. It could be a dining accommodation or a housing accommodation. So some of the students that I was working with were seeking things like flexibility in attendance or priority registration, extra time, note takers, but they also might have been looking for accessible recreation facilities, so access to workout facilities or an ADA accessible room and things like that. So in addition to working on accommodations with students at Georgetown, I also oversaw all of the academic support services for the entire student body and provided workshops and one-on-one meetings with students on things like time management, organization, study skills, but the really big thing for me, the big takeaway from my experience working at Georgetown was that many of the students that I worked with at Georgetown really had not been made aware that they would be responsible for like doing the university process of um, going in and requesting their accommodations, being able to self-advocate, and nobody had really guided them in thinking through how that process would work for them and determining how their disability might impact them in their daily life on campus or support them in making plans for how they would continue their care once they started school. And so these students were really left unprepared. And that's where I knew that there was a need for support and guidance with transition prior to the students reaching college. So that's where Accessible College can be really effective. We start working with students as early as ninth grade to ensure that they have the self-advocacy skills and the necessary supports to provide for a smooth transition. And I've worked with a number of students with paralysis and students who have other mobility impairments over the years. And I've learned a lot during that time. And so I use my experience as a former university administrator to inform this process when I'm working with students and families so that they in turn can be better informed and positioned when they're starting that college search process or starting that transition process so that they can best advocate for their needs. So just a little bit about this fantastic project that Accessible College has with the Reeve Foundation. Through this partnership, we're providing one-on-one consultations to students with paralysis and their families through the Reeve Foundation. And there are a limited number of consultations available overall and a limited number of sessions with each client as well. And we'll talk a little bit about in detail about what you can expect from these sessions. But briefly, the consultation sessions are 1 hour one-on-one sessions. And through this project, we're able to provide up to 3 sessions for each student free of charge. So that's a big takeaway. It's free. And it's really a great primer to get families or to get students thinking about the types of things that they might want to be looking at when they're exploring colleges or the types of questions that they might want to be asking. Um, so if you're interested in this service, and we'll put this up at the end as well, but you would want to get in touch with the Reeve Foundation information specialist to get started. And the number there is on the screen. It's 1-800-539-7309. And later on in this presentation, we're actually going to be hearing from some project participants who I've been working with to hear about how this project has been providing support for them and what they've gained from this experience so far. I also wanted to point out, and I will be sure to put this in the chat box shortly, that there is a new publication that we put together for the Reeve Foundation. It's called Navigating and Transitioning to College with Paralysis. And it's a transition guide that we worked on. And it's really thorough, and it's really accessible to everyone. So it's helpful, and it's not super long, and you can get information that you need to kind of start this process. It's free and it's available on the website. The link is up there. I'll put the link in the chat box too, so that you can look for that as well, and you'll get it in an email after the presentation too. So I wanted to talk about why this project is necessary. It focuses specifically on students with paralysis who are transitioning to college. And we know statistically that students with physical disabilities make up about 7% of the number of students with disabilities on college campuses across the country. But there are some really important things that folks need to understand as they're starting this transition process. So many families don't really know about the legal change, how the laws change between high school and college. So in high school, the accommodations are covered by IDEA, the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, or by Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act. But in college, the accommodations are typically covered by the Americans with Disabilities Act and Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act. And a common question is, what does that really mean? What does that look like? So that means that the types of accommodations and services and supports that a student may have in high school may not translate to the college setting. And that's because each school, each college has their own process for determining accommodations. So typically students have to provide documentation and go through the interactive process, but it looks a little bit different at each place. And also the ADA is a little bit different in how it interprets types of accommodations that might meet someone's needs. And we'll talk a little bit about reasonable accommodations in a few bullets here. The really significant change, I think, for most students is that students have to be able to self-advocate. And what that means is that in the college process, the process relies on the student being able to request their own accommodations through the college's disability support office. So typically that's done by the student independently, without the assistance of their parents. The parent can be a part of that conversation, but the university administrators are typically going to look towards the student for the student to be able to identify what their needs are, talk about what their accommodations might be, and to be advocating for themselves in that process. And that's why that self-advocacy piece is really critical to get started on as early as possible. In terms of accessibility and access, whether it's physical access or access to educational course content, colleges that receive federal funding are required to be ADA compliant. But we know that what is compliant is not always accessible, either physically or content-wise, to each individual. And so the way that this looks can really vary from college campus to college campus. So it's super important that students are starting to think about what their needs are and what they're looking for before they actually end up at that school. The Americans with Disabilities Act provides for what is known as reasonable accommodations. And so it's in quotes because that leaves a lot of room for interpretation. So if your student can go into college knowing what their needs are, knowing what types of accommodations they'd like to request, knowing how to problem solve when and if a situation or a challenge arises, they can be better positioned to advocate for themselves and to get what they need. Also, that kind of translates into the workplace setting too, because the ADA is also the law that governs employment. And so once students can start kind of getting these skills together, they can have more success later on after they transition from college and into the workforce too. some things that kind of catch parents by surprise. Colleges do not provide one-on-one aides or paras or personal care attendants. So if you have a student who's going to need a personal care attendant for daily living needs like toileting and eating, getting dressed, things like that, that's something you have to figure out independently. And that's an area where we work with families and students to kind of figure out what the best process is for that. And if you look back at that transition guide that I was talking about earlier too, there's a whole section on PCAs that is really helpful. And finally, there are just a lot of moving parts when a student is transitioning to college, especially if they're moving away to campus and this is their first time kind of living independently. So we help students and families think through, how is the student going to manage laundry, getting food, keeping up with academics, manage their continuity of care if they have other healthcare needs that they need to tend to at the same time. Or for adult students, thinking through, how are you going to manage your family life and your college life, and kind of working through some of those aspects. And I take a coaching approach with students. So we kind of work through where they're at now and kind of where they'd like to be able to successfully transition into that college setting. So just a quick little tidbit about the current client population. So we started this project in September 2020. Our students so far range in age from 17 to 41. We have 2 female participants, 3 male participants. Parents are a part of some of the sessions. And that's kind of, I leave that up to the student and the parent to kind of negotiate and figure out if they want to both be a part of the sessions or if they want to do a one-on-one with the student to kind of work on some of those self-advocacy pieces. And I always follow up with an email after each session to let the parent and student know what we've talked about. We have 2 students who are returning to college or starting college post-injury. 3 of the students are current high school students. 2 students are more medically complex, so they use ventilators or have other health needs in addition to some of their needs related to paralysis. And the students are looking at a variety of things. So some are focusing on community college or vocational training. Others are looking at 4-year colleges. And one student is interested in exploring gap year programs and thinking about other things that they might want to do instead of going to college right after high school. So that's something we're working on as the students' needs are coming out in our conversations. So I have a couple interviews. A couple of our participants weren't able to be here live, so we have 2 videos so they can tell you about what their experience has been. And then the third interview with Chris Luttrell will be coming up after we watch those videos. So the first one is with Hayden Peck and Heidi Peck's mother, and they're in Ohio, and Hayden is a junior in high school with spina bifida. And I am going to attempt a technological feat here to see if I can share the right one. Okay. All right. So this one is with Hayden and Heidi Peck. Hi, Heidi and Hayden.
Hi.
Glad you guys could be here. I wanted to ask you some questions today. So could you tell us a little bit about maybe who you guys are and how and why you signed up for the program?
Okay. I'm Heidi Peck, and this is my son, Hayden Peck. He is junior in high school. He has spina bifida, and he is looking at colleges, and we know nothing, or we didn't know anything about what to do with disabilities and how that works with colleges and applying and once he's at college.
Great. And what do you think, like so far in our work together, what's been the most kind of helpful thing for you to learn about or to explore?
For us, it's just the individualized plan. So it was not just here's like a standard you use, it's that you were able to take it to Hayden's level and exactly what he needs that's specific to Hayden versus that might have even similar disabilities.
That's awesome. And what's the most surprising thing that you think you've learned so far?
We had no idea it was going to be so much work. As far as advocating, like Hayden will have to do it for himself, but we're used to the school just hands off his IEP or 504 to the next school, and we just kind of have a meeting and roll with it. And we had no idea what it was going to take with accommodations or like housing accommodations and everything else that he might need. So learning about all that was very good, very surprising.
Yeah, I feel like that's a common sentiment amongst parents, so you're not alone in that. And what advice do you have for other students or other families who are embarking on this college transition process?
My biggest piece of advice would be to start early. So even though I felt like we were starting early since he's only a junior, there's so much to learn and so much to kind of get organized and to get set up for even going on college tours or even what colleges to look at, that just start as early as you can.
That's great. Thank you guys for this. I really appreciate it. So that was Hayden and Heidi Peck. And then the next video we have is from Heather Zahiri, and I'm going to bring that one up now. And Heather is in California, and I'll let her tell you a little bit about herself and her son. And the sound is a little bit wonky on this one, so you might want to tune into those closed captions so you can get it all. Hi. Can you go ahead and introduce yourself and then tell us a little bit about you and your son?
Hi, my name is Heather Zahiri. My son is Kayvon, and we live in San Francisco. Kayvon is 17, and he is college bound. As far as his disabilities, he is paralyzed from the neck to his waist. He is ventilator dependent, wheelchair dependent, and requires 24-hour care at this time.
Thanks, Heather. And like, how did you find out about this program, if you remember, and why did you sign up? Why did you feel like it was important?
So I found out about Accessible College through the Reeve Foundation newsletter. There was an invitation for a webinar that you were doing, and then I just followed the prompts to sign up. I think it was the perfect thing to come up for us, just because college, just the transition from high school to college is so intimidating, and having to figure out everything and function in the role of as a mother and like a counselor and just a caregiver and trying to figure out the college piece also, I think was really overwhelming. And to see such a service as this, I was like, sign me up. Yeah, for sure. Yeah, so just the whole idea of really a lot of things to organize and think of as we transition, and having a service that can help us figure that out and navigate it, I think was the main reason why. Yeah.
That's great. And what's been the most helpful thing, do you think, so far in our work together?
I think many aspects of our work together, we've only met like a handful of times, but I think one, your genuine warmth and concern, I think in meeting with Kayvon and I, thank you, that's been really helpful. And just really breaking things down as far as like in a concrete way, in like a spreadsheet, as far as like things that we need to address, because there are so many. I think that's really valuable to me, as far as like to dos and going back to things. Oh, we have a kitty here. And then also the very systematic approach. I really appreciate that as well. And then also the follow-up emails that you do, and kind of the just putting things in bullet points as far as things that we need to remember and follow up on. And also that the grid that you had sent us as far as like colleges and who to contact, and all of that. So that's all been very helpful.
Yeah, so it sounds like you really like kind of like the tangible like takeaways and action items.
Yes,
which, like,
for sure.
Yeah, I think like that's a lot of the stuff that a lot of parents and students actually really like, because it helps you kind of focus on figure out like, what do I need to do next, as opposed to feeling like inundated with all of the things.
I think they're really helpful prompts too, because as a parent and there's so many things that need to be done, and especially with a child with special needs. And so having someone actually prompt you also of like, these are things you need to do, I think that's really helpful.
Yeah.
And to
Yeah.
know that we're not doing it alone, I think is really very helpful also.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It creates like a thought partner and also like a little bit of accountability too.
That's the accountability part. Yeah.
Yeah.
Kevin and I actually were talking about it, and he's like, "Oh, we need to do this." Annie had said that, and we still hadn't done it. So, well,
Well, I'll follow up with you.
yeah.
And then like, what do you think the most surprising thing is that you've learned so far?
I think just knowing that colleges offer like the range of things that they offer for accessibility, I think can vary, and so that was kind of surprising. I think in high school there, at least in California and the school district that we work with, there are like kind of the expectations are a little bit more clear as to what the school district can provide, and then in college it's like you're kind of on your own and trying to figure things out, and so that has been surprising, and trying to figure out you know what is it that they really offer, not just on the website and on paper, but what actually they offer. So
Yeah, and that's I think that's the thing that catches most parents by surprise too, is how variable the accommodations can be, and how even though every college has to be ADA compliant, they might it might look different at different places, right? And so that can be tricky to navigate, like if you don't know all
for sure.
things.
Yeah.
And do you have any other advice for families who are embarking on this process?
I think start early. I think that would be really helpful, and then really connect with you, or if there are other certain programs within their communities or school districts that can provide similar services. Yeah, and yeah, but your services have been really invaluable, so thank you. But yeah, starting early, having an accountability partner too, that's really important. Yeah.
Yeah. Great. Thank you so much.
Thank you for the opportunity to interview.
Thanks. So I'm glad we got to hear from those two parents, and I want to bring in another participant now who's live. There he is. And that is Chris Luttrell. And I'm seeing Chris just briefly. I'm seeing a couple things. Okay, I'll check I'll find the right link for the guide. Okay, I'll make sure I have the right one. And then I'll circle back to some of those questions that are in the chat. But I wanted to bring Chris in, and Chris has a little bit of a different life experience than the two other people. So Chris, why don't you tell us a little bit just about yourself, and then we'll go from there.
Well, okay. Well, I have a car. I was walking across the street and a car hit me. So I have a C4-7 spinal cord injury, incomplete. So I have some mobility, but most of it I'm in a wheelchair. So, and I guess I'm 41. So it looks like I'm the oldest one on there, 17 to 41. So, but I also have a 17-year-old that's going to college. So this is kind of, I'm glad Annie took me on, and we're here right now.
That's great. And so like, why did you sign up, right? Like, so what was the thing that you were like, this is for me, I should do this?
It happened back in 2016. So, it's been a long journey, but I'm finally at that point where I always look at the Reeve Foundation on my email when it pops up, and I saw the college. I was like, oh, I jumped right on it. And because I've signed up, started the process, and then all this other stuff, with physical therapies all the time, and trying to get the college lined up, and it was always just so daunting. So I signed up, and I was like, okay, let's try this route. So me and Annie are kind of in the middle of it, and it's awesome. I'm glad I did sign up. So that's why I signed up, because I want to go back to school and see what I can do.
And what do you think, Chris, has been like the most helpful thing so far, being a part of this program? What's been the most helpful thing?
Oh, I mean, you're so personable and easy to work with. And you kind of, you don't just like, okay, this is, what you can do if you have a disability, blah, blah, blah. And then you kind of help you go through the process. And you kind of showed me like, cause I'm like, okay, I did this, for the last 20 years, but now I'm in a wheelchair. So I have no clue what I'm going to do. So Annie was kind of like, okay, look, Chris, this is some things that the college that you're trying to go to, it's some career assessments. So do some of these and let's see where you want to go. So I picked construction safety. So I can be like, oh, I'm in a wheelchair. So this needs to be this tall or this wide so I can fit through it. So she's been awesome with that.
Thanks, Chris. It seems like
Yeah.
there's an aspect of this too that I think like isn't, a lot of people think this work is kind of like checklisty, and there is that aspect to it, kind of like figuring out what fits where. But there's also this like kind of interpersonal coaching thing where it's like
Oh,
looking,
yeah.
looking at you and what your needs are, and then figuring out how do we get from point A to point B.
Ooh, easy. Oh, for sure. Yeah, and then I haven't even talked to you about the 17-year-old I have. That's all that stuff. So yeah, but absolutely.
And Chris, what do you think has been like the most surprising thing that you've learned thus far? And I know it's only been like a couple times that we've met, and I feel like it was just yesterday that we started, but what do you think has been the most surprising thing you've learned so far?
How how much stuff there is out there that you don't even know, or I mean, you may think about or whatever, but I mean, you just open a lot of doors for, I mean, somebody with paralysis. I mean, even somebody without, it's so daunting and trying to even, if you don't really know what you want to do, and, even coming from high school to college and you're trying to get on like a website, a college website and figure it all out. It's like, okay, there's a whole bunch of stuff and you're like, oh my gosh. So yeah, it's a lot. If you just try to do it on the computer, which is what, or on your phone, which is what kids do, they don't want to go talk to somebody face to face because, oh my God, so, but yeah, it's surprising how much it is.
Yeah, I think like that's something too that folks really don't understand is that like there's just the transition to college or starting college, no matter what age you are, is kind of a daunting process for everyone.
They don't teach you anymore.
Yeah.
They don't in high school. It's like they don't teach you that. Oh, you have to do this by yourself.
And then when you have the added layer of having a disability, that's just like another kind of layer of complexity to kind of navigate through. And so having like this opportunity to, for me at least, to be able to work with you and with these other participants is fantastic because it blends those two pieces together. And it sounds like you're finding that really useful.
Oh yeah, I'm glad you took me on.
And then what is some advice that you might have for other people who are thinking about this or, thinking about going back to college or either post injury or kind of someone like yourself? What advice would you have for that person?
I mean, even just just for just for even if you don't know, and just to say, hey, if this is what I'm doing, I want to go to college, and if you know what you want, then it's kind of a little bit easier. But with the disability, you can open a whole different side, even if you know what you want. I mean, as far as housing, and I mean, and it's not so much hard work, but just it's a whole lot of work, and it's a whole lot easier with somebody's help that knows what they're doing, or in any facet of going to college. So yeah.
Something that I always say to people is like, you don't know what you don't know, right? And we're not all experts in
Oh
everything.
yeah, if I would have known now when I moved in, or no, whatever, the famous, then what you know now. I mean, oh yeah. So
Yeah.
Listen to me, right?
Chris has good information. So yeah, so that's super helpful. And stick around, Chris. You can go back and turn the camera off and put yourself on mute because we'll do questions in a couple minutes, and people might have questions that you might be able to answer. Okay.
All right, well, thanks, Ann.
And I'm gonna bring my PowerPoint back up for folks, and here we go. So just to kind of capture what I heard a lot of the participants saying was starting early was a huge thing. I think sometimes people get a little bit surprised at actually how much work there is to do in terms of figuring out you know, the self-advocacy pieces or preparing the student to be able to navigate some of these things independently. And also, quite frankly, for parents, it's a huge adjustment too, because you know, as a parent, you might be used to kind of leading the way, but now your student has to be able to take those reins, and that can be it's a transition for everyone. So what we do is we have intentional conversations about that, so that everybody can start to be thinking about what those needs are and what that transition will actually look and feel like. In terms of what to expect if you have a student who might be a good fit for this program, what we do is we have an intake form. It goes through the Reeve information specialist, and I'll be sure to put that information up at the end so that everybody can have that. And we go into these sessions, which are 1 hour, one-on-one meetings, typically via Zoom or phone, sometimes both if technology is not behaving. And through the Reeve Foundation, we have up to 3 sessions for free. And it's customized planning. So we look at where your student is at and kind of figure out what needs to be done from that point in the process. So if they're a junior in high school starting to look at schools, we sort of work through what types of accommodations they have in the high school setting, if that's something that they have, and then figuring out what those accommodations would look like in college, figuring out the questions they could be asking. If you're an adult student who's returning to school, it might be stuff like we've been doing with Chris, which is thinking through what types of career choices or types of vocational training programs might you want to go into, and then looking at also the accommodations piece and the things that might be necessary to have in the classroom setting now. For a lot of people who have been injured and are going back to school, they don't really know what types of accommodations might be a good fit for them. So we actually look at what are the functional limitations that the student is experiencing, and then figure out what the type of accommodation is that might be helpful to them in that setting. And we customize documents. So I create documents that I share with the students and with the parents so that they have those things that they can use to go forward. And after every session, we send an email recap of the session. And if there's a to-do list, which some people like, send that as well, in terms of, you know, things that they can work on independently in between our sessions or things that they can follow up on. And it sounds like, based on some of those interviews, that people find that actually really helpful because it breaks things up into more bite-sized chunks. So here's the information again on how to sign up. And I think it's also in the chat as well. I think I saw it there. But you can connect with the information specialist either through the phone number or through the website. And then the information specialist will send that request on to me. And I will get back in touch with you, and we'll set up a time to meet virtually. And now, well, it's almost perfect amount of time. We will take some time for questions. And I saw some stuff coming in on the chat. I'm bringing everything up, so you might see my face kind of darting around. And while people are kind of formulating their questions, I'll also put up that contact information so that you have that too. And I'll read out the questions here. Let's see, we've got some stuff. Okay. So we have one question here about, is starting as a sophomore in high school too soon? We need to work on self-advocacy so much with my son, which is a common sentiment that I think a lot of people have. And so in my private practice with Accessible College, we start working with students as early as 9th grade. Usually what it looks like in the sophomore year of high school might be starting to figure out, things like, how do you get involved in your IEP meetings or in your 504 meetings as a student? How do you make your own doctor's appointments? How do you fill your own medications? How do you start to work on those self-advocacy skills in ways that are kind of more approachable and accessible in your everyday life? That's where we start on those pieces with younger students. And then we can also start to think about, what are the types of accommodations that you have in the college setting, or excuse me, in the high school setting, and how might that look in college, so that the student can begin to understand what types of things that they might need to develop in order to be able to do things more independently. So I would say, no, it's never too early to start. and yeah, sophomore year is actually a great time to start working on some of those self-advocacy pieces, because there are a lot of little inroads that you can make. There was a question about how long will the program be going. Right now it has funding through the end of June. And so that's all I know. So that's all the information I can give on that. Then we had another question here about a student who, okay, it sounds like a student who had to take some time off, was injured, had to take some time off, is now from college, and is now doing school from home and then planning to return in the fall. So I would say, like, if you have a specific student situation, go ahead and connect with the Reeve information specialist, and we'll see what the best path forward is for your student. Let me see if there's some other questions coming in. So, okay, is it possible for a student that needs a PCA to be able to experience living on campus at a college, or is living at home while attending college a more realistic possibility? That's a fantastic question. So I did put in, if you scroll back in the chat, there is a resource that I recently was a part of working on with United Spinal Foundation and New Mobility, which is the Wheels on Campus guide. So that guide actually has listed out the 20 most wheelchair friendly colleges. And it also has information on 2 schools, which are the only 2 schools that have kind of built-in personal care attendant programs, which is Wright State and the University of Illinois Champaign-Urbana. Those are the only 2 schools that have kind of an add-on PCA service that students can use. Otherwise, if your student wants to live on campus, they have to hire their own PCA. And that can look a little bit differently depending on the student's needs. So it might be hiring an organization, like a home healthcare organization, to provide aids for your student. It could be bringing a family member as the student's personal care attendant. It could be hiring a number of students on campus to meet that student's needs. So what I do with students and families is kind of help figure out and work through what that could look like for them, and what that might mean for them, financially, and where there might be resources for that as well. And if you go to the transition guide that I wrote for the Reeve Foundation, which there's a link to that too, there's a whole section on personal care attendants that might be helpful for you to look at. So check that out. Okay, so the next question was, Accessible College only is funded through, I don't know. So Accessible College is a private LLC. You can check out my website. It is www.accessiblecollege.com. This project, where students can receive free, can work with me for free through the Reeve Foundation, is only funded through June 2021. So I hope that answers that question. Do you go over financial aid options with students? So I should be clear too, I'm not a college consultant or a college counselor. So in terms of like the typical kind of working through the financial aid pieces, that's not my area of expertise, but we do have some information in that transition guide that might be helpful for students. And also I have a number of colleagues who are independent college consultants or high school guidance counselors who have provided me with a lot of information too that's free that I can always share with students too. In my private practice with Accessible College, I'll often work alongside the student's high school guidance counselor or alongside their independent college consultant too, if that's helpful. But there is a whole section too in that resource that we created, the transition guide, on scholarships and funding. So you should check that out for sure. All right. I'm looking to see if there are any other questions. Sorry guys, scrolling, lots of scrolling. I think we answered, I think that is everybody's question. We have another minute or two if folks have any other questions, or if anybody has questions about how to contact us. You can look at that information here. All right. Otherwise, I want to thank everybody for joining us today. And if you do have other questions, you can always reach out to the Reeve Foundation through the information specialist, or you can reach out to me too. And I'm on Facebook and Twitter as well. And the information is up on the screen. So I want to thank Chris Luttrell for being here with us today to share his experience. And I want to thank the other two families who were able to comment too about their experience. So thanks everyone for coming today. And if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to us. Have a great afternoon.